The Russian war economy has been booming. Russian shell production is nearing 2 million per year, more than 7 times what all European countries can produce together. Without the flow of weapons from the US and Europe tipping the scales, Ukraine would have likely fallen long ago. And while the EU's military aid to Ukraine recently surpassed that of the United States, Josep Borrell, the diplomatic chief of the EU, declared that Europe wouldn't be able to cope without military aid from the Americans. All the while, Russia is ramping up its war economy and gearing itself for a long war of attrition in Ukraine and against the West.
Putin's endgame, at least as I read it, is still going for it all, hoping that he can sustain this, also militarily, also in terms of arms production, and that eventually the support from the West to Ukraine will collapse.
With the United States potentially withdrawing from the coalition of countries that have kept Ukraine alive, could Europe support Ukraine alone against Russia in a marathon conflict? Today's video is sponsored by Conflict of Nations. Set between the late 20th and early 21st century, this game isn't just about battles. It's about strategy, alliances, and mastering the art of modern warfare. Imagine this. Real-time combat where units move in real time across a beautifully crafted isometric world map. Your mission? World domination. In a week-long competition, you'll be putting your planning skills to the test, featuring over 100 modern weapon systems from stealth strike fighters to nuclear submarines, and an extensive research tree with over 250 items. The depth of the game will keep you engaged for hours. Hone your strategic mind by building and shifting alliances and work with or against other players to achieve your battlefield goals. Ready to dive in? With the link in the description, get 13,000 gold and 1-month premium subscription for free. Choose your own strategy and engage in epic battles and take over the world. Vladimir Putin is counting on the very real possibility of an American withdrawal. There are signs that Putin is looking to the upcoming 2024 elections as a potential way to get his victory in the war. Donald Trump, who has praised Putin in the past, has called for ending aid to Ukraine. Alternatively, the US could get drawn into other confrontations, like the one in Israel, or its more broad confrontation with China. And while the United States says it has the money and industry needed for several wars,
we're the United States of America, for God's sake.
It needs the political will to do so. It's something that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is worried about when he talks about the need for Europe to be able to defend itself on its own. And that's because so far, the United States has proven essential in Ukraine. Since the start of the war, Ukraine has been kept afloat by the lifeline provided by the United States and its Western coalition. Commenting to Al Jazeera in October 2023, Vladimir Putin said that Ukraine would only last a week without Western military support. But Europe, which had shuttered its weapons industry after decades of underinvestment, has been running out of weapons, such that NATO officials have said that European warehouses are scraping the bottom of the barrel. And most of the West's production capacity is in the United States, which with its $800 billion military budget is not running out of ammunition. In the face of this Western coalition, Russia has been quite alone, and has been dealt a series of heavy blows by Western sanctions. Yet despite these sanctions, it has managed to keep its head above the water and even expand its military industry. In fact, Western sanctions on Russia are becoming less effective over time. Let's first talk about financing. The main way in which the West reduced Russia's revenue to finance the war is through energy sanctions, which worked in 2 main ways. The first is the energy ban that came into place in December 2022. Europe mostly stopped buying Russian gas and energy products, leaving it struggling to find alternative customers, mostly since its pipelines are linked to Europe and it has few liquid natural gas terminals to export on international markets. The other aspect was that Europe and the United States imposed a $60 price cap on Russian oil. Western-based shippers and insurers, which dominated the market, were forbidden to ship and insure Russian oil beyond that price. But Russia has managed to find new customers for its energy products in India, China, and Turkey, particularly to sell its oil, which despite selling at a discount, made up for its lost Western customers. And the thing is, the worst of the bite of the oil sanctions may already be over. The gap between the price at which Russia sells its oil and global oil prices has narrowed from $40 to $15 today. Part of the explanation for this is that Russia is progressively replacing Western oil tankers and insurance companies, allowing it to bypass the oil price cap. After recording a 30% fall in energy profits in the first half of 2023, Russia registered an increase in energy export profits thanks in part to production cuts coordinated with OPEC, which raised prices, allowing it to stay afloat for now. The other way the West sought to break the Russian economy was by disrupting Russia's pre-war Western-dependent supply chains. Russian industry ahead of the war imported Western components which were assembled often by Western companies into complex products, like cars but also weapons like missiles. Many of those same companies cut ties with Russia after the invasion started. And while Russia seized their assets and started running their operations, without the Western supply chains and components, they have only been able to produce inferior products.
They are mostly worried about is still heavily hit. Civilian industry as well, but that's another thing. I mean, the Russian car industry, for example, has completely collapsed. And also civilian airliners have more difficulties all the time.
But when it comes to weapons production, Russia's difficulties have for the most part been solved. The New York Times reported that missile production has exceeded pre-war levels.
One of the problems for its military industry is that there was a lot of Western technology embedded in those arms and arms production.
Through sanctions dodging, Russia has still managed to get its hands on the components and in particular the chips it needs for war, with Turkey and several Central Asian countries acting as intermediaries. And due to the West's relative decline in economic weight, also in high tech, it means that Russia is increasingly able to import the things it needs from elsewhere. With additional trade with India, but mostly China, Russia would be able to use its new energy cash reserves in those countries to replace its now defunct Western supply chains. In fact, Ukraine's armed forces are finding ever more Chinese components in Russian weapons, and Russia seems to be increasingly able to solve its supply bottlenecks. For example, the supply of optics systems for its tanks, which was provided by a Western firm before the war, now seems to have been solved, allowing Russia to once again make better tanks. While this increase in production is not enough on its own, due to the huge battlefield losses that Russia has suffered, and it has turned to North Korea and Iran for weapons, the Russian defense industry has been booming thanks to increases in government spending. According to Russian statistics, metalworking, electronics, railway, shipping, and aviation have all expanded by more than 8% since the start of the war, highlighting the impressive achievements of the Russian war economy in scaling compared to the West. And while some people have written off Russia as a house of cards, it's important to remember that the much smaller and heavily sanctioned North Korean and Iranian economies have managed to stay afloat sufficiently to remain a major thorn in their neighbor's side. Russia has taken a hit. Its trade balance has fallen steeply since its 2022 peak as a result of the fall in fossil fuel revenue and more expensive imports for both its consumer market and its military industry. But even as the cost of the war rises, it has one major lever that it can pull to keep the war financed: making cuts to standards of living. And that's something it has been seemingly ready to do since August 2022, when its defense minister Sergei Shoigu declared that Russians could suffer like no one else. And so in response, European countries have done the only thing they could do: gone on a military spending splurge. European Commissioner Thierry Breton has gone around Europe to coordinate an increase in artillery shell production, to both supply Ukraine and replenish its own weapon stocks. European countries are looking to start up tank production again, with Germany preparing the follower to the Leopard 2 and Poland looking to license the production of South Korean tanks. European companies like Rheinmetall or Nexter are setting up production lines in Ukraine to provide it with weapons more directly. But all of this will take time that Ukraine might not have.
You have to build new production lines, and they will not produce more overnight. I think this is easier to do in Russia.
And so to make up for that shortfall, European countries have resorted to buying ready-made ammunition and equipment from the United States, something the US has pressured them into doing. Poland, which has gone through the most drastic expansion of its military, has bought more than $34 billion worth of American weapons over the past year alone, about twice as much as its entire military budget for 2022. And this will allow Europe to replenish its weapon stocks and beef up its muscles quickly to dissuade Russia. But it's hardly a long-term sustainable solution in the event of a long war, especially if the US were to withdraw from the Western coalition. Even before the war, Europe's defense procurement was dominated by the United States, and that is looking like something that it will keep up. While Europe cannot cope without the US at the moment, with the way Europe is remilitarizing by purchasing weapons instead of producing them, it makes sure that it won't be able to cope in the future either. Russia doesn't look like it's going anywhere. Its economy has taken a hit, but is still chugging along. Its society is militarizing, and with the most liberal elements of Russian society having left the country, the prospect of change is as elusive as ever. If you like this video, then you might consider watching this one on the reconstruction of Ukraine, or this one on the deindustrialization of Europe. And don't forget to go check out Conflict of Nations to choose your own strategy and engage in epic battles and take over the world. With the link in the description, get 13,000 gold and 1 month premium subscription for free.